Welcome to the inverted upside down. You're listening to Paranormal Now with Alan B. Smith, rebroadcast on the UNX Network, Thursdays at 11 p.m. Pacific, Fridays at 2 a.m. Eastern.
However you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls, to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. Joining me tonight are two fantastic guests, because these are fantastic subjects, and I'm really excited to share this double feature night with you. Our first hour guest is Charles Lear. He is the author of The Flying Saucer Investigators. So we're going to take a look historically and get a sort of inside look at the legendary investigators, the investigation groups, and so much more with Charles Lear. So if you love UFOs and ufology, this is the hour for you. In the second hour, we have Marie Jackson, who's been on Coffee and UFOs, and she's returning because she has a new book called 10 Feet Under. And I think you can guess what we are talking about there. She's a paranormal investigator, and so all things that go bump in the night will come to us in the second hour, if you can make it. All right, so as usual, if you are a fan of coffee as much as I am, please check out Coffee Bean, Alien Coffee Bean Coffee at aliencoffeebean.com. It's cosmic, it's good, it's the best. And you get a 20% discount off if you put in the special Paranormal Now code, and that is mystery20, mystery20, all caps. And of course, follow on Instagram, which is at Paranormal Now, on Twitter, paranormal_now. And if you are a fan of this show and other shows on this channel, please like down below, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you don't miss upcoming shows. Like this week, we had two pop-up shows that were not scheduled, so you don't want to miss out on that. And we're going to get right to our first guest because we are running out of time. Charles Lear has many interests, of which UFOs take up more than a little of his time. His main interests in the UFO subject are in the documented history the phenomena has spawned and the people who investigate it. We'll be discussing not only the investigators, but the witnesses they met. Charles, welcome to Paranormal Now.
Hi, Alan. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming on. We spoke not too long ago, and it was a sort of a last-minute opportunity here, thanks to Philip Mantle. And this is a subject that so many of us love, but your particular look at the subject is not necessarily common. Oftentimes, I think in ufology, when people are studying the groups, inspecting what they did, when they're sharing stories about the investigators, it's built within a greater story, a look at UFOs from a more broad subject. Or maybe it's looking at the Aztec UFO event and they bring up certain investigators. But you dig down. And what did you find?
I got to know the investigators. It was it was a really amazing journey. Actually, I first got interested in the people I covered, most of them, reading John Keel's The Mothman Prophecies. So he mentioned throughout the book, these characters turn up: Gray Barker, Jim Moseley, Ivan T. Sanderson, and they sounded really interesting, and I wanted to know who they were. And I've been writing a blog for Martin Willis over at Podcast UFO for about 4 years now. And in the course of writing that blog, I would focus on the investigators themselves. And that's where the cases come from. So as I'm looking into the cases, I'm meeting the investigators. And occasionally I would just write a blog focusing on the investigator. And then Martin suggested that I write a book because I had so much material. I write a blog a week. And his idea was that I do some sort of compilation of my blogs. And I said, you know what? How about I write a book about the flying saucer investigators? And he hooked Philip Mannel up with Calvin Parker.
Mhm.
Uh, Martin Willis's blogger had written a story about the Pascagoula incident, and Calvin Parker, he got a message saying, "Yeah, that was a really good blog. Thanks a lot, Calvin." And Martin said, "Is this Calvin Parker?" And he said, "Why, yes, it is." And so Martin got to know Calvin, and then he hooked Calvin up with Philip Mannel.
Mhm.
Calvin wrote a book for Philip Mannel, and the book did really well. So uh, Martin had a good track record with Calvin. I'm with Philip.
Mhm.
So he introduced me to Philip. I pitched the idea to Philip, and Philip went for it. So the result is the Flying Saucer Investigators.
What made you interested in flying saucers and UFOs in the first place?
Born that way.
You're born that.
Born that way. Yeah, yeah. Anything strange,
So,
I've been into since I was a little kid. So
as far as you can remember.
yeah, yeah. The first three-letter word I typed on the internet was UFO.
Wow.
So,
Okay, can we say what year was that?
who 80s. I was kind of an early
Ah,
internet guy. I
yeah,
was,
that's that.
yeah. Um, but
So were you
yeah,
a
yeah.
computer geek at the time?
I wouldn't say geek. I like computers mainly as a writer. It was a
Mhm.
lot better than using whiteout to edit. But
True.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, but I wouldn't say geek. But yeah, I was an early internet user.
Wow. Okay. And what was was it Apple, Windows?
Oh, Windows, where,
Yeah.
where you would write a prompt. I think a C prompt it was called back in the day when when all the letters were green.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, graphics were like an amazing thing when they came along.
They were.
And I'll never
Okay.
forget that for my father actually built me a computer,
Yeah.
and then he set it up running, and I'm looking at like this. They were really primitive graphics,
He,
but I was
it's
amazed at the time.
it's
Mm.
so funny. I don't, I'm sure previous generations have their version of it, but you can't describe to generations who grew up with what we have now, what it was like to see like that, those initial video games where it's just a little shark, going across the screen.
Oh yeah,
Like
I was a big Pac-Man guy
yeah,
back
yeah,
in,
like
but
those
yeah, yeah,
graphics, what were those? What was that? 8-bit graphics. I mean, we
yeah,
were
yeah.
just ecstatic about it. It was mind blowing. Yeah.
Mm.
And so,
So,
what was mind blowing for you in your research regarding the individual investigators?
oh, just the range of personalities. I wouldn't say mind blowing, but it was just really fun to get to know these people.
Hmm.
Um, some of them were really uh, Gray Barker. Gray Barker um, basically entered ufology um, with his book. He was the one of the first investigators to look into the Flatwoods monster case. It was right in his backyard. Gray Barker grew up in Clarksburg, West Virginia, or was living in Clarksburg, West Virginia. He actually grew up in Flatwoods. I think he grew up in Flatwoods. So, 1952, when this a group of young boys and two of the boys' mother
Hmm.
uh, climbed up a hill to investigate what they saw a fireball and then it seemed to land. So they ran to get a flashlight at Kathleen May's house, the mother of Ed and Fred May. And then she went along with them, a whole gaggle of them. I think there were like six boys, maybe. Um, and they ran up the hill and they saw a large glowing half dome about the size of a house. And then one of them, Eugene Lemon, the older of the boys, he was actually a National Guardsman at the time. I think he was
Hmm.
all of 17 years old. He swung a flashlight and hit this big creature that had glowing eyes, or it was either lights shining out of the eyes or the eyes were glowing, depending on who you heard. And it was a big, scary thing about 12 feet tall that hissed, apparently emitted some sort of gas, and they all went running. And that case made the papers, made international news. And Gray Barker got contacted Fate magazine, which had been started by Ray Palmer, who's one of the first people I write about. He's been called the man who invented flying saucers. John Keel actually said that about him. And the person at Fate who responded told him, yeah, go investigate. I think it was 2,000 to 3,000 words, don't speculate. So Barker was off to the races. So yeah, he wrote about it in his 1956 book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. And that got Barker into the scene. Barker started off very serious, but then turned into more of a folklorist. And he also didn't have any problem with contactees. He actually published some contactees books, which put him on the outs with a lot of the more serious investigators. So
is that funny how we use that term, serious investigators?
Yeah.
Right.
It's
like I'm chasing, flying objects in the sky. I'm serious. However,
the big monsters in West Virginia and winged red-eyed creatures.
Do you accept the alternative explanation, which is that perhaps like a big owl like landed on like a stump or something?
The thing is that they estimated its height of about 12 feet because it was under a branch. So if it was an owl, it would have been over the branch. And Barker did a composite picture where he had a drawn picture of the Flatwoods creature under the actual tree, and you can see the branch sticking out. So that kind of makes me doubt the owl theory. I think it's a plausible idea. But I think it's much more fun to go along with the actual creature.
Yeah, well, it's like Mothman, right? People say, "Oh, it could be," I forget what kind of crane.
Sandhill crane.
Sandhill crane. Thank you. Yeah, and that's a little hard for me to buy because we have cranes around us, and even if a crane was abnormally large, I don't know if I would ever confuse it with what people described.
Well, and the weirdest thing about that too is the occurrence of Cleid conjunctivitis with some of the witnesses, which is like welder's burn. I'm actually a welder, and it's ultraviolet light. It's sunburn of the eyeballs, and it hurts really bad. And that's a lot. There are a few witnesses who actually claimed that or exhibited that in front of John Keel, according to him. And that's actually as I write all these blogs and look into case after case after case after case, that turns up over and over and over again. And like with people even going to doctors and hospitals with that problem.
How do you feel about John Keel? I mean, obviously he turned you on, but he also turned on a lot of other people. So what is it about his writing that resonates and invites people in to follow these mysteries?
Well, for a UFO writer, he was actually a very good writer. So that's the main thing. My favorite book of his is Operation Trojan Horse. I think it's his most coherent. And it's Mothman Prophecies is a strange book because it's super dense. I mentioned in my book that it's like reading 6 books in one. and he had so much material for that his editors cut most of it out, and he got another book out of it. And he said himself that he could get about 6 books out of all the material he had for that. So yeah, Keel was a good writer. I mean, he was a paid writer. He made his living as a writer. He wrote for television, and he wrote numerous magazine articles on all subjects, not just UFOs and the paranormal. Keel was primarily a Fortean. After Charles Fort, who was a turn of the century writer who wrote about subjects he called the damned. He would pull these strange stories from newspapers, historical records, and actually scientific papers. And things like falling fish, stuff that still happens today, weird things falling out of the sky, and other odd things. So Keel considered himself a Fortean first and foremost, and UFOs were part of that for him. But yeah, he's an engaging writer. I think that's one of the main things. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Charles.
I think that's one of the main attractions many people have for him. But he also himself said that he was first and foremost a writer. And the idea that he took some artistic license, I think he pretty almost openly admitted. So you can kind of take him with a grain of salt, you know. But on the other side, there a friend of his, Doug Skinner, maintains a site called johnkeel.com, and he actually posts. He has a lot of Keel's archives, a lot of his notes and his correspondence, and you see his actual notes with some of the stuff he wrote about in the Mothman prophecies, and the notes, they seem straightforward, and they match up with what he actually wrote. So, you know, maybe a little artistic license in there, but there's also, you know, a lot of a genuine, his own genuine befuddlement.
Right. Well, perhaps, you know, some colorful flourishes. I mean, in Peter Jackson's The Hobbit, he has Gandalf speak to Bilbo, and he says, every good story deserves a little embellishment. You know?
Excellent. Yes.
Right. And it doesn't mean it's not true, but there might be a little bit of color added to the story. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so with Keel, you go a little farther in that direction, and you get people like, well, if you go way farther, you get people like Ray Palmer, who's the first person I wrote about. But what's, you know, a lot of people call Ray Palmer basically made his name with the Shaver mystery. He got a letter from this guy who was almost definitely a schizophrenic, paranoid schizophrenic. Palmer actually claimed in a speech at a UFO convention that he was told directly by nurses that Richard Shaver was indeed a paranoid schizophrenic. He was hospitalized at Ypsilanti State Hospital. Anyway, Shaver wrote a series. He first wrote a letter to the letters to the editor section of Amazing Stories, saying he discovered an ancient alphabet called Man-tongue. And basically, if you take the Roman alphabet, and every single word, every single letter lines up with a word. So, for instance, M would be man. D would be Darrow, for detrimental robot. Robot in Shaver's mind was somebody who was controlled by harmful rays. And these, so Palmer actually, one of the editors actually found this letter first and threw it in the trash can, and Palmer fished it out, according to legend, and said, "You call yourself an editor," and and actually published it and challenged his readers to try this for themselves and see if they can get meaning out of and just take any book or any piece of literature and put words next to every letter and see if you get any kind of meaning. And his readers claimed they did, some of them. So after that, he got a letter from Shaver that was about 20,000 words, just a sprawling epic. And it didn't really have a plot. It didn't really have a protagonist. And Palmer added all these things in as an editor and turned it into a story. I remember Lemuria. He called it a racial memory. Basically,
Interesting.
Something. A memory from a former incarnation is essentially how he meant that. And this involved creatures that lived inside the earth called the Darrows that were forced down there because the sun's rays are harmful to them. They were from another planet. And they degenerated and then controlled us up here on Earth with their ray guns. And which is actually a classic schizophrenic thing. In any case, that's
a classic schizophrenic motif.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, being controlled by some central authority.
Oh, sure. Okay.
The tinfoil hat and all that.
Understood. Yep.
So this story took off, and Amazing Stories sold like gangbusters, especially the first issue. They were in rationing during wartime at the time, and paper rationing, and they actually pulled paper from another magazine to print more issues. So and after that, Amazing Stories was pretty much had a Richard Shaver story in almost every issue. And then by the time the Flying Saucers thing took off in 1947, Palmer was seriously interested in this and tied it to the Shaver mystery, because Shaver described these craft and tunnels in the earth that were sort of like flying saucers. So I said, yeah, that's what they are. Well, Shaver started Palmer started another magazine called Fate. He was basically a lot of science fiction fans weren't happy with the Shaver stories in Amazing Stories. They wanted their good old-fashioned science fiction. And also Amazing Stories was moving their headquarters, and Palmer and Curtis Fuller decided to start their own magazine, and that was called Fate. And the first issue of Fate magazine had a story by Kenneth Arnold about his first sighting, and also the story of the Maury Island incident, which Kenneth Arnold was actually hired by Palmer for $200 to investigate. So Kenneth Arnold was the first paid private investigator. And he got in over his head that it turned out it's almost definitely a hoax. It's got a big old FBI file. But what I was getting to is Palmer. A lot of people considered him a huckster, kind of a like a carnival barker type. He was pretty fast and loose, but it seems that Palmer's view of reality was very flexible, and I think it is actually closer to the truth to say that Palmer believed that reality was actually not fixed. He actually believed that dreams were linked to our reality, and he had a lot of really interesting beliefs, a lot of esoteric beliefs. So to call him straight out a huckster is is oversimplifying it. Sure. And in that vein, you've got Gray Barker. That's kind of why I went down this tangent. Gray Barker is a very similar character. He tended to look at ufology from the point of view as a folklorist, and he was asked. Alan Greenspan wrote about this in his introduction to Gray Barker's book, The Silver Bridge. He said that Barker was asked what he believed in, and Barker said everything and nothing. which sounds like, somebody being overly dramatic. But the more I look into Barker, the more it seems that's genuinely how he viewed things. He didn't really have a fixed belief system.
Yes. Physics would suggest that there's some truth to that. Especially if we get into more theoretical physics. And so does religion, right? The mystics have been telling us that for forever, that everything is one. There is no real beginning or end, right? It's just everything was and always will be.
Yeah.
So those kind of lines of thinking, it's interesting how it finds its way into UFO research or lore. So of all of the groups over the years, and then we have to go to a break real quick. Of all the research groups, NICAP, APRO, MUFON, which of these groups do you think was the most sincere, the most uncorrupted in their approach?
Well, actually, that's what I really like about this period is they all seem very sincere. There might have been things don't really go awry in ufology until you get into up to around the mid 70s to the 80s. But this period that I write about is 1947 to basically 1970, which is the termination of Kenneth Arnold's sighting June 24th, 1947, to the close of Project Blue Book, officially announced December 18th, 1969.
Are you, Charles? Are you looking back with rose-colored glasses?
No. I'm looking at the archives, and that's another amazing thing about this journey that I went on is how much is available online. You can get all the APRO bulletins, you can get all the NICAP publications, most of them, and there's archives for the unexplained in Sweden. They have the APRO bulletins. I got the NICAP stuff from NICAP.org, which still exists. It's still being maintained, I believe, by awesome. Fran Ridge. And let's hold it there,
Charles. We'll come back after this first break, and we'll continue the conversation. We have a lot of ground to cover in just a short period. So stay with us. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on the youtube.com/Mystic Lounge channel, rebroadcast on the UNX network, Fridays, 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll see you on that flip side.
Tell me why, with 12 sides, the odds are that we die. Roll the dice as you hide. I can't find you on the other side of the lines.
This coffee is delicious. Is that a UFO? I'm actually seeing a UFO. This coffee is awesome. That's why they call it alien coffee bean. Is this even made on Earth?
Do you have an interest in the paranormal? Then you'll love the unxnetwork.com. The X is your streaming audio and video for everything supernatural, strange, and mysterious, like UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, and so much more. From hosts like Jimmy Church, Whitley Strieber, Micah Hanks, and Christina Gomez. Visit the unxnetwork.com show page for a complete list of all the paranormal programs you'll find on the X. Be sure to follow us on Twitter for updates at KUNXDB. Follow our Facebook group, UNX Network. Find the podcast on Spotify, iHeart, Audible, and Apple Podcast. It's time. It's new. It's the X.
signs keep on coming, they point to the end, but I hold on so tight.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith. Thank you so much for joining us. If you like our bumper music tonight, that is music by Septembrio. We love Septembrio here at Paranormal Now. If you want to find out more about them, just go on ahead to Septembrio, spelled with a y.com, or download their music wherever you listen to your podcasts and music. Charles, all right, so we have such little time to cover this topic. So continue your thought with where you think the groups are in UFO investigative groups, and then let's get back to some of the characters.
Yeah, I think they were very sincere. That's what I really like about this period. It wasn't super commercialized. It was a little subculture, and they seemed very in earnest. So that goes for APRO, NICAP, and there were organizations before them, CSI New York, Civilian Saucer Intelligence New York, I think it is, and they were amazing. They didn't last too very long, but a lot of their members went on to join NICAP and the Center for UFO Studies in the 70s, J. Allen Hynek's group. Specifically Ted Blocher and Isabel Davis. Those two wrote there's an amazing publication you can pick up at the QFOS website called the 1955 Flatwoods Incident and Others. No, the Flatwoods Incident and Others of 1955. I think that's what it's called. But it's an amazing investigation. The Kelly Hopkinsville incident, and Others of 1955, and that Isabel Davis investigated the Kelly Hopkinsville incident, and it's a really thorough investigation. I think that was 1955. She did that, and I mean, for that time, it was really thorough. And
what makes an investigator like her so good?
She got the trust of the witnesses, got them to open up, and gave all the documentation. She has Blue Book correspondence. The Blue Book, I think the Blue Book record card is in there. I might be wrong about that. But yeah, all the documentation she could find, and really good transcripts of the witnesses' interviews.
And the Lorenzens, what's your take on the work that they did?
It was they developed a really good network, and MUFON came out of APRO.
Just in case anybody doesn't know, the Lorenzens founded APRO.
Yes, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, and they developed a really good network worldwide, and they had investigators all over the country who would just go out and hear a report, read about a report in the paper, or hear something, from friends or from the witnesses themselves. And they were on the scene, and they would send in a report to APRO headquarters. MUFON actually came out of APRO and carried on that tradition. NICAP, also National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, headed up by Donald E. Kehoe, also had a very similar network. They called their people out there subcommittees. So the networks they developed were really amazing. And the only thing we have left like that is MUFON.
Well, we do have SUFORC, right? And the National... oh my gosh, why is it?
A NUFORC, you mean?
Yeah. National UFO
Reporting Center. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, they don't have a network. They take individual reports and log
That's true.
them and record them. Uh, so MUFON is pretty much the only remaining American organization that has that sort of network. There are other countries. Each country has its own take, its own methods of UFO investigation, and there are groups all over the world in other countries. But I don't think there is anything to compare to NICAP and APRO today, other than MUFON right now. But
So, how does someone like Stanton Friedman compare to these boots on the ground ufologists, researchers who worked for these organizations? Because, or rather, how would you kind of compartmentalize or categorize different types of researchers?
Well, Stanton Friedman, he was a big lecturer, and he did his research. He unfortunately, I would say, unfortunately, in my opinion, got tied up with the Roswell incident and the whole MGJ-12 fiasco, which involved Richard Dodie. You can learn about Richard Dodie in the Mirage Men. Essentially, Richard Dodie was an Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He's a self-proclaimed disinformation agent.
Yeah, Richard was actually on the show a couple of months ago.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, he contacted William Moore, who was one of the authors on the first Roswell book, along with Charles Lear. Stanton Friedman was the researcher. And Dodie contacted Moore and he set up a feedback loop. They would turn over all their material that they were gathering in their investigation of the Roswell incident to Dodie, and Dodie and his people turned over documents that supported their ideas and their research. So that whole he got kind of knocked into a tailspin. But Friedman shows up in my book. Jim Moseley, James Moseley was considered the court jester of ufology. Moseley put out a publication, and its last days was known as Saucer Smear. Started off as Nexus, and he wrote mostly about the personalities in ufology and a lot of gossip. Very occasionally he would actually investigate something. He actually looked into George Adamski very early on. But Moseley became a go-to guy for lectures because there were an electricians society in Detroit was looking for a speaker, and they wanted Donald Kehoe, and Donald Kehoe was too expensive. So the company that handled Donald Kehoe contacted Moseley, said, would you be willing to do this for this price? And he said yes. And he was a hit, and Moseley was off to the races. So Moseley became the go-to lecturer. And Moseley wrote a book, I think 2002 he published it, Dangerously Close to the Truth, Confessions, shockingly close to the truth, Confessions of a Grave Robbing Ufologist. And in the book, Moseley says that Stanton Friedman would underbid him and also contact people where Moseley was scheduled to lecture and say, you don't want Jim, you want me. I'm a nuclear physicist. So Moseley claims
there was competition, or was it one-sided competition?
Moseley claims that Stanton Friedman basically pulled the rug out from under him. So,
Well,
you
yeah,
know,
I mean, maybe he called. He got wind that he was speaking somewhere and called up and said, "I have my own version that I can offer you." But it's possible that sometimes they just changed. Isn't that
yeah,
reasonable? That they
well,
found someone else.
I could also argue that Friedman was. This is an opinion that Friedman was the one of the first big personalities of
Oh, sure.
ufology,
Oh, yeah.
saying, "I'm a nuclear physicist. Listen to
Mhm.
me." And
Well, I
that
mean,
takes
imagine if
takes
you're. Oh, I'm
it,
sorry,
it
Charles. I was gonna
it takes a burden. It takes the burden of offering proof for everything you say off of you. Though Friedman did his research, I can't deny him that he definitely did his research, and he's
Mhm,
well
mhm.
known for that. Um, uh, but compared to the researchers in the time period I'm writing about, I don't
Mhm.
think I think they had a lot more integrity from a good during that time period. APRO kind of got into problems later.
Mhm.
They money came into it because it takes money to keep these organizations going, especially when you have
Sure,
a
sure.
network as extensive as that.
Well, I
And
mean.
they were writing and publishing books, writing articles for magazines,
Mhm.
and also uh, at the time in the 70s, Bob Pratt, who was a thorough investigator, was writing for the National Enquirer. So they were National Enquirer was offering good money for UFO stories. So APRO kind
Mhm.
of started selling their stories to the National Enquirer. That might have hurt their integrity a bit,
Sure.
but the
Well,
period beforehand, I think they had a lot of integrity.
I think what happens, I mean, Coral Lorenzen really got APRO started. And I'm sure in the beginning, she didn't think to herself it was going to be, the organization would be as big as, as they made it, and the exposure that they got and the requests that they got to come on site and to speak it. And then I think what happens is, and I see it even today, people get invited to do certain things, get paid certain things, and then you kind of get stuck in this place where they only have so much time, and they'd rather put their time into investigating UFOs or the paranormal. And so they start taking those kinds of gigs, even if they're less credible, just to keep the money coming in so that they can supplement their passion, which I get. I totally get.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a definite trap in this business. The danger of becoming a personality. Um,
well, so
that's
I was accused of being a ufologist recently, and and then I was invited to a MUFON group to speak, and then the first thing I said is I am not a ufologist. I do podcasts. I have my own. I did a documentary recently, and then that's my version of investigating something, but that's it. Like I think there's a danger of just letting people kind of put you into a category.
yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think people expect to fill those shoes, and I sure as heck don't want to go down that road.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So okay, of all
Well,
of
I'll
these,
give a good
oh,
example of somebody who
sure.
couldn't who I give credit to Coral Lorenzen and Jim Lorenzen, her husband. He was director for a bit for when Coral's health didn't allow her to take on the role of director. So Jim
Mm,
Lorenzen stepped in. Uh,
mhm,
but they got a lot of attention. They were able to handle it. The person who didn't appears to be Albert K. Bender, who started the International Flying Saucer Bureau, arguably the first to go international. I
mhm,
think he started in 1952. I believe it was October 1952. Um, Gray Barker actually wrote him asking for, saying he was interested in becoming a member. And Albert K. Bender said, "Why don't you be the representative, the chief investigator of West Virginia?" And then he made him the chief investigator of the International Flying Saucer Bureau. It blew up super quick. It went international. and they were a big deal. And it seems that Bender couldn't handle it because a year later, October 1953, they put out the last issue of Internet of the Space Review, their publication, and Bender. Let's see if I can find it here. Bender, the October 1953 Space Review contains the following statement of importance. The mystery of flying saucers is no longer a mystery. The source is already known, but any information about this is being withheld by orders from a higher source. We would like to print the full story in Space Review, but because of the nature of the information, we are sorry that we have been advised in the negative. We advise those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious. So, and after that, they put out a few more issues for people who didn't want their money back. Didn't talk about flying saucers at all, just space. And that was the end of the flying saucer, the International Flying Saucer Bureau. Bender's, Barker, and other members, Lucchese and Roberts. I forget their first names. August C. Roberts. Yeah, it was August. Yeah, August C. Roberts and Dominic Lucchese. They were in touch with. They were close with Bender, and they wanted. They basically approached him and said, you know, what's going on? And Bender came up with this story that he was visited by three men, and this is where the whole 3 Men in Black thing comes from, and told to cease his investigations. And I think he claimed they confiscated all the issues of Space Review that he had in his domicile, and that was the reason he shut down the bureau. He was told to. So that was his story. Mosley actually interviewed him, and Mosley said he wasn't impressed by the story. And Mosley's thought this was maybe 1954. Mosley wrote in shockingly close to the truth that he thought that Bender was in over his head. Essentially, that Bender was in over his head and just wanted to get out, and that's why he came up with the story. So there's if that's true, there's an example of somebody who couldn't handle the spotlight.
Yeah, that's interesting. Someone like Stanton Friedman, because he was in the spotlight so much, all the exposure on television, I can imagine that people would just think, okay, that's the person, right? That's the guy that we need to reach out to. Is that problematic? Was it better in the early days when you didn't have that sort of media exposure, and a group could kind of come in and maybe not even recognize someone's face who is an investigator for NICAP?
Yeah, well, things really changed with the Long John Nebel show. That was the first radio show to bring on guests to discuss the flying saucer mystery. And this was in the I believe it was in the 50s, and his guests included the contactees, the Georges, George Adamski, George Van Tassel, George King, and also Howard Menzel, not Howard Menzel, Howard Menger. And he also had serious investigators like Isabel Davis, the CSI New York people, Ted Blocher, and Jim Mosley. And they would have discussions. But flying saucers became showbiz at the point of the Long John Nebel show. And that's where things really started to change.
Okay, so So you think that there is still some sort of even a taint to a degree in the 60s?
Yeah. People started, and a lot of people started showing up, like Dr. quote unquote
Mhm.
Frank Stranges, who was quite a character. He wrote a book, Stranger at the Pentagon, claiming to have met an alien Valiant Thor, I believe from Venus, who was at the Pentagon, trying
Yeah.
to advise us how to peacefully run our planet, and
Well,
essentially being blown off. But Frank Stranges became quite a character and did a lot of lectures, and was a big personality. Uh,
yeah.
so yeah, and you could say that, the taint was on with the contactees, who were getting a lot of publicity and
Mhm.
really enjoying the spotlight, and the circus element really came into it. But the circus element was actually always there when the Kelly Hopkinsville incident. This was a Kelly Hopkinsville goblins. The families that reported this experience, they got swarmed by uh, an interested public who just parked, all over their property, walked into their house. They didn't get a moment's peace. Woodrow Derenberger did the same thing. He reported an encounter with a alien called Indrid Cold, and the same thing. All these people would swarm their properties,
Mhm.
and it was like a circus. So that element's always been there. And being able to keep your head straight in the midst of that is quite an accomplishment.
Indrid Cole is part of the through thread of the Hellier series. Have you watched Hellier?
And I started off, I couldn't get
You
into
did?
it.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. So
But
Indrid
I didn't
Cole.
know Indrid Cold showed up. That's pretty cool.
Yes. Yeah. It's very interesting.
Mhm.
And Valiant Thor, there are people today that still um, believe that Valiant Thor is a legit being.
Mhm.
We only have a few minutes left. If you can give us, what you think is in all of ufology that you've looked at, what is the best case?
Oh, um, the best. That's a tough
Mhm.
one. I really like. I keep coming back to this. Uh, in 1964 in Hobbs, New Mexico, there was a young boy named Charles who was playing outside his grandmother's laundromat, with his grandmother looking, out the door occasionally at him. Uh,
Mhm.
he said that he saw a black top-shaped object about 5 feet tall across the way, and he said he got the sense that it was connected with him. He would move to the left, it moved to the left, he moved to the right, it moved to the right, he moved to the left, it moved to the left. And then all of a sudden, it shot towards him.
Mhm.
And it came with such speed that he braced for impact, thinking it was going to go right through him. And it stopped right over his head, shot down flames with his grandmother looking on in horror, and caught his hair on fire. He ran into the back door to the laundromat, and they put the fire out. Grandfather was
Mhm.
fortunately pulling up, and they took him to the hospital. Um,
Okay,
this
that's not a bird. That is not.
this made the papers.
Yeah.
He was in the hospital for 2 weeks. His head was so swollen that his nose disappeared, his ears were turned inside out,
Wow.
and he said he felt no pain. There was terrible itching. His grandmother actually had to sit with him so he wouldn't tear his skin off. I
Mhm.
think his mother did too. His mother got involved, of course. And James McDonald, another famous UFO researcher, interviewed the grandmother, the mother, and Charles on tape, and the tapes are housed at the University of Arizona.
Mhm.
And um, they all tell this story. Um, So you've got newspaper reports, you've got him actually in the hospital, and this crazy story. And what in the world could it be? So that to me is a case that just, leaves you scratching your head. But why would the government be testing something in a residential area, and why would it burn the head of a young child? So that to me is a really good case. And unfortunately, it got overlooked because everybody was looking at Socorro at the time. That's 1964, the same period. And this case, APRO did write about it, but it just kind of came and went. David Marler, who wrote estimate of the situation, triangles estimate of the situation. I'm sorry, David, I got that wrong. But anyway, he found Charles and recently and interviewed him, and Charles sticks to his story. He didn't even tell his wife. He runs a business. Wow. And he sticks to his story, and he still has loss of hearing in his left ear and needs to wear glasses. Has had to wear glasses, but that's the only thing left. The only consequences of this encounter. No scars, nothing from what should have been horrible burns, and it also mystified the doctors. So,
but that's the key word. It's a mystery. Charles, where can people find your book, Author of the Flying Saucer Investigations?
It's the Flying Saucer Investigators at Amazon.com. That's quite all right. And it's also, I think you can get it at flyingdiscpress.com. That's the publisher.
Okay, go check out Charles' book, Author of the Flying Saucer Investigators. And Charles, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate our conversation tonight.
Oh, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Alan. So,
okay. All right. Take care, brother. And everyone, good night, Charles. Everyone, hang in there. Don't go away. We have a fantastic guest coming in the second hour. It's Marie Jackson, author of 10 Feet Under, a book that sold so fast she didn't know what to do. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on the Mystic Lounge YouTube channel, rebroadcast on the UNX network. We'll see you on the inverted upside down.
And you are the sky. I need to swim free, and you need to fly. I live for daylight, you live for the night. You love to wander and die.
This coffee is delicious. Is that a UFO? I'm actually seeing a UFO. This coffee is awesome. That's why they call it alien coffee bean. Is this even made on Earth? Hey all, Paranormal Now will be syndicated on the UNX network, the new mainstream, where you can find your favorite hosts and shows on the cutting edge of ufological and paranormal news and topics. Listen for Paranormal Now, rebroadcast on the X at 2 a.m. EST Fridays, 11 p.m. PST Thursdays at unxnetwork.com.
I've been living in beautiful chaos, feeling at home only when I get lost. I'm a mess, but a hot mess, dreaming with my eyes open. I'm a mess, but a hot mess. I'm not scared of being broken. I've been going and I don't wanna be found. Go on and I don't wanna be found. I live for the
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your grateful host. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for everyone in chat for hanging out tonight. If you like tonight's bumper music, check out LizetteXavier.com or wherever you download your music. Lizette Xavier just happens to be the life partner of Michael 8 from Septembrio. So we're keeping our music in the family here tonight. And speaking of family, Marie Jackson is slowly becoming family on this channel. So I'm really happy to bring Marie on in just a moment. If you appreciate the podcast and the shows that we bring to the Mystic Lounge, please like, comment down below, but definitely if you can subscribe and click that notification bell. I would really appreciate it. That way you don't miss the upcoming shows and pop-up shows, which do happen on occasion. So I really appreciate your support, however you can give it. Marie Jackson joins us to discuss her research into the lively world of ghosts and her new book, 10 Feet Under. With a gift to see spirits and sense unseen presences, Marie has now spent years developing her abilities, revealing the tormented, lost souls, and spirits who are simply unaware they are dead. Marie discusses why, for many in the African American community, the idea of even discussing ghosts and the paranormal was considered taboo. She also talks about how, in her dreams, she can connect with what many would consider an elemental truth. Marie discusses this and so much more. Marie, welcome back.
Yes. Hi, Alan. It's great to be
How
back.
are you? Yes, and now we're in a live format.
Yes, and I have better quality camera.
Yeah, and it's a different back. Is that a different backdrop or just a change of camera?
It's just a change of the position of where I was. It's the same room I was in, just
Okay,
the different part of the room.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about your book, 10 Feet Under.
Yes. And I actually need to get you a copy of it so that way you can actually read it. So this is the book. It's called 10 Feet Under. It is the true story of what took place with my family when we were growing up living in a severely haunted house here in Kansas City, Missouri. It tells it from the perspective of me. And even though that there were 2 adults and 7 children living in the house at the time, and we all experienced something different. So this is the story of what we went through, similar to a poltergeist. If you've seen the movie Poltergeist, these were similar experiences that we had living in that house. But, we were forced to secrecy. We were told we cannot disclose anything that took place in that home. So, I didn't get an opportunity to share. We didn't get an opportunity to share our story until 4 years ago. But that is the book. Unfortunately, it's not available online as of yet. I have had so many people reach out to me. It's been so amazing, the support and the amount of people that want to get a copy of the book. I do have physical copies on hand right now, but I'm actually working on getting the actual digital online version for Amazon. So
If somebody wanted a physical copy, I guess they could just email you or?
Yeah, they could just email me. And if you're able to put my contact information below, it's ghostlinktv@gmail.com. You can email me or message me on any of my social media platforms. Ghostlink TV is the name of the social media platforms that you can message me through. But yeah, I'll be happy to mail you a physical copy of it with my signature.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's really cool. I'm a fan. And so the book is totally autobiographical.
Yes. It is. It's the true story behind everything that transpired from my perspective of encounters. And if you watch the previous show that Alan and I put together, a little bit of the background of what transpired with us living in that house, but this is definitely from an autobiography standpoint. And it explains detail.
For those who might be unfamiliar, can you go all the way back to the beginning to your first experience in your house?
Yeah, absolutely. So back in the 1980s, my family, I come from a large family. My mother and father had 9 children. So we relocated. I'm from the state of born and raised in Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri. So we relocated from the north side to the south side of Kansas City. And we moved into this standard ranch style home, no basement, on the flat, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, about less than 1,000 square feet, but it was big enough for our family because we were expanding. So it was a good transition from where we were coming from. So day one, when we moved into this house, it was spring of 1988. And I was 4.5 years old at the time, and very rambunctious, very alert. We were groomed to learn things very quickly and very rapidly at young ages. So we picked up on a lot of different things. So the very first day that we moved into this home, there was activity. There were things that were taking place in the house that were just like, wow. And being a young African-American child we lived in a predominantly white neighborhood. There was no way that we could talk about everything that we were experiencing. So just to give you guys a little bit of background on what actually happened and a little bit of an insert from the book. So the very first day that we moved in, there was issues with the garage. There was writing on the wall of the garage that I don't know if the prior owners tried to alert us to what was going on in the property, but there was writing on the back of the wall that said, "Get out, monsters in wall." So according to my father, that wasn't there prior because he had been coming to the house, moving things in the house before we got moved into the house on the official move-in day. So he's on the phone with the property manager trying to figure out what's going on in this house and why this writing is on this wall. And, you know, my dad tries to hold it down. And my dad had a Polaroid camera. He secured a camera everywhere he went. He was so fascinated with that instant capture. So he had this Polaroid camera and he was taking pictures of the garage to show the property manager what he saw as far as the writing on the wall. And in the photos, my dad picked me up and I'm on his shoulder and we're looking at these instant captures because, you know, you got to sit them down and they got to develop. And we're looking at these instant captures and there's a shadow in the Polaroids that were developed. So my dad goes into the garage and he's kind of like trying to compare the picture to what is in the garage to see if there's anything distinctive. And there wasn't. And as soon as we were finishing up that day with moving things into the house, my dad and I was getting ready to leave and I was taking my little Tonka truck because I was a tomboy and I had the little Tonka truck. And he was holding me and I remember him looking into the garage and we both saw this dark shadowy figure just kind of like floating in the garage. So my dad told us, hey, don't go in the garage, stay away from the garage. But he never told us why. So he was very, very vague with his reasoning and he was very, very stern. My dad was a manly man. You know, we couldn't go against his word. We couldn't challenge his ideas. We couldn't challenge what he thought or believed was going on. We were very, very, very muted in anything that we were able to express. So that was the very first day. One of the encounters that happened with my mom was about 6 months pregnant with my baby sister, Monique. And she was putting things away in the kitchen. And my mom is very anal retentive when it comes to organizing things. So she has to do it in a meticulous way. And she was putting everything in the kitchen, putting everything in the cabinets, putting everything in the refrigerator. And I'm in the house. My two brothers are in the backyard. My two older sisters and my younger sister, that's a year younger than me, they were outside. And then my baby brother, he's in a playpen inside the house in a different room. So my mom heard him crying. He was only about 1 at that time. And she took me and we walked in the back bedroom. And we couldn't have been gone for maybe 30 seconds. A minute, maybe at the most. And it sounded like a train ran through the house. So my mother grabs me and my brother and we run back and she runs us back into the living room to see what happened. And everything, all the groceries, all the dishes, everything is all over the place. So she tries to get my two older brothers, Wolf and Bobby, to come back in the house because she thought that they did it. So, you know, usual suspects, the rowdy kids. So my brother's like, no, we were outside. So my mom is just completely like, what the hell is going on? So she puts everything back in and she tidies everything back up. My dad comes home and I go outside to greet my dad because he's got groceries because we're planning for our birthday party. We all have our birthdays together. We're all May, June birthdays. So many of us, my dad and mom decided, hey, let's have it together. So we were actually planning for that.
It's also economical too.
It is very economical. Especially with a large family. It was 9 of us.
Right? You have to be. Sure.
House. So yeah, that was the best. That was definitely the best thing. It was the smartest thing for my parents. So I go out there. My mom's done putting everything back away in the kitchen, back in the refrigerators, everything back up. She's still standing in the living room because she's still a little confused about everything. So I go outside and help my dad and get some groceries and get ready to bring them in. And my mom is staring into the kitchen. She's just staring into the kitchen. So I'm looking at my mom. My dad's calling her name. She's not responding. And then I look over to the kitchen. Everything is in disarray again. Complete disarray. Everything is back on the floor. All the groceries are all over the floor. Everything was out of the cabinets. And my mom is staring into the corner. There's a door that led to the backyard in that house. The house was very small. The living room was across from the kitchen. Everything was like very on top of each other. So my mom's staring at the back door. And then I look in the direction of where my mom's looking. And there's that dark shadow again. And it just floats through the back door. So my dad's automatic response was, the boys did it. The boys are the ones that did it, you know. And my mom's like, no, they didn't do it. They didn't do it. They didn't do it. So it's crazy. So and these encounters are definitely, they're in the book as well. You know, we went through some amazing stuff. There was an instance when my brother was on the toilet, and we only had one bathroom. So we used to form an assembly when my dad would call an assembly line outside the door of the bathroom, where everybody would wait for the next person to come out and they would go in. And
I can't imagine that. It was just me and my sister growing up. So, and that was bad enough.
Yeah. And we were stair steppers. So we were one right after the other. Like we were all a year apart, basically. Like my mom was constantly having children. So, you know, that day, my brother Wolf, who's 3 years older than me, he's in the bathroom. I'm waiting by the door. Everybody's kind of settling down because it's the evening. And he runs out of the bathroom screaming, kind of like still got his pants hanging down and hasn't really finished doing his business. And he's terrified, and he starts screaming, saying that there's a monster in the window. There's yellow eyes in the window. So he's screaming. So my dad comes out and he's like, there's nothing in the window. It's probably a cat. You know, it's so dismissive of everything. So my dad goes in there and checks everything out. My brother will not go back into the bathroom because he's completely terrified. So my mom has to go in there with him so he can finish using the bathroom.
Sure. I mean, you gotta finish what you started. Sure.
One hell of a number two. So I didn't go in the bathroom without my mom. So I was like, Mom, can you come in the bathroom with me? Because I don't want to go by myself. So that was one of my brother's encounters. If you guys remember the game Jacks, where there's the ball and then there's a little spiky little jack you hit around and you pick them up. So my older sister, Missy, she was like exceptional at that game. So one day we were playing in the living room and my sister Missy was playing jacks and she was so good at it. I could never get the hand coordination right, but she was so good at it. And I was the captain of hide and seek. So I was counting and my sister was just playing jacks. So I turned around and because I couldn't hear the ball bounce anymore. So I'm like, well, maybe she left. And I turned around and the ball and the jacks were levitating in the air. So I'm looking and I thought it was like one of her like jack tricks or something, but looking at the ball and the jacks levitating in the air. And she took off running and then the jacks and the ball hit the ground and kind of disperse in pieces. So I looked at that like, okay, maybe that's something that she wanted to happen. But the way that she ran, I could see that this was not a normal thing that happened with her game. There's been encounters.
Yeah, so you're kind of you're looking at it with a sort of innocent eyes.
Yeah, and I'm granted I'm only 4.5 years old, you know, but everything that we're picking up is like, okay, this is not normal. This is not what we're familiar with. So we all collectively knew something was going on in this house. We knew something was different about the house, but it was like my father was so dismissive. He was so dismissive of it, and it was like we couldn't say, hey, Daddy, there's a ghost in the window. And then him actually be like, okay, let me check it out and make sure you guys are safe. It was none of that. It was always, well, you're making it up, or, you know, one of you guys are playing a trick on each other. It was always that.
So never the benefit of the doubt.
Never. It was never that.
And what about like just to like sometimes parents will entertain the idea just to make their children happy. No. And my father, he was a very funny guy. He was
a very strong-willed man. He was the only child. He wanted a big family. So him and my mom had a big family because it's what he wanted. But he just had this cocky arrogance about him. And he wanted to be the one that was the overseer of his household. He didn't want anything else to have an I guess, implantation in what our dynamic was. He was the one that made the rules. So anything outside of his authoritative role, he was so dismissive of it. You know, there's been encounters where we have physically been injured. And my brother, we were all sitting around back then. There was so many of us, you know, we were very, very frugal. And we would eat off of like paper plates and things like that. Sometimes because my mom didn't want to always have to do dishes. So we would all sit in the living room on newspaper when it was lunchtime or dinner. So that way we could clean everything up after ourselves. So this afternoon, and these things didn't care what time of day it was. That's the, you know, misconception. It only happens at night. Oh no, these things they didn't care. It was the middle of the afternoon. I think it was a Saturday. And we were all sitting around in the living room. We were eating potato chips and hot dogs. That was like the go-to food whenever we didn't feel like really cooking. And my brother was sitting there. My brother Bobby, who's a year older than me, he was sitting there eating. And all of a sudden, he was levitated in the air, literally lifted off the ground and thrown into the garage door. And there was a door in the kitchen area by the living room that led to the garage. So he was literally thrown into that door. So we're all looking, we all stopped and we're looking like, we all saw that. We're looking at each other like, we all saw that, right? Right? We're not crazy, right?
Well, and how did he react?
He was crying. He was screaming. And
That's crazy.
Yeah, my older brother, Bobby, not Bobby, but Wolf, he goes over to him and lifts him up and holds him. And then my dad comes in and he's like, what's going on? And my mom's like, something's wrong with this house. Something's wrong. And my dad, she explains what happened. She was like, Bobby just got lifted in the air and tossed across the room. Nobody touched him. Like something's wrong with our house. So my dad's like, he's just playing. You know, they were wrestling. He flew into the wall. So we're all, you know, like I said, my dad, he wouldn't let us have a voice. So whatever he said went. That's what we had to concur with. So it was such a suffocated environment. We were so suffocated, and it was becoming stressful by the day. Every day it was so stressful because we confided in each other, but we couldn't have a voice to talk about it. We couldn't talk about it with our friends. We couldn't talk about it with the neighbors, even though some of the neighborhood kids would coin our house as quote unquote the bad house, and they weren't allowed to go in our house. But we never,
because of the ghost activity.
Yeah, they told, well, after, you know, getting older, I realized because of the ghost activity, but I thought they were thinking it was the bad house because it was so many of us. Maybe it was like, oh, maybe there's too many kids over there. There's too much going on. Yeah. But it was because of the ghost activity, but we never asked why they called it the bad house. We never inquired about it.
Yeah.
Years into,
No, go ahead.
Yeah, years into, you know, after I started doing the research on the house and the area and started finding out the history of everything. It was so interesting to find out that we weren't the only ones that were going through those experiences in that house. There were 5 other families before we moved in the 80s that had experienced it and moved right out of the house. So, and then there were families after we left, it had such a high turnover with people moving, renting, and moving out. The house was actually under a property management company is under a property management company. So they only lease it out or rent it out to people. So, but yeah, just to find out that we weren't the only ones that went through what those activities and those experiences, it was a relief to me. It was such a relief. Yeah, it was.
Now, what state is the house in now?
The state is, the location of the property is in Kansas City, Missouri. So I'm still located in Kansas City, Missouri, but it's still standing. They've made some modifications, but they haven't made any big changes to it. It's still the same floor plan. Still the same.
So it's just past. Is it still in your family, or is it's new ownership?
No, it's still owned by the same property management company. Well, it's been sold to, their family, and they've upgraded the name,
And they
changed
okay,
it.
got it.
But yeah, it's
But no
not
one in your family lives there anymore.
no, none of my family
Okay.
lived there. We stayed there for about a year and a half till my mom couldn't
Oh,
take it anymore. She
wow,
couldn't
okay.
take it.
Yeah. So I mean, have you ever gone back?
Yes, as an adult. As an adult. I started my investigations in 2016. I went back. I would drive past the house. Oh
Yeah,
gosh,
yeah.
anxiety, and drive back past the house. Then I finally went to the house and talked to the people that live there. And here's the irony of this: the
Mhm.
investigation into the Longview Road house is what I call it. The person that is living there now, I
Mhm.
met her almost 20 years ago, and we were working together, and I was an assistant manager at a thrift store, so I had met her years ago. So when I started researching who was currently living in the house, her name
Mhm.
came up, and I said, this can't be the same person that I know from when I used to work at this company. So I
Yeah.
messaged her on Facebook, and it was the same person. I was like, hey, are you living in South Kansas City? And it just kind of broke the ice with the conversation. And then
Mhm.
she's like, yeah. And then she told me her house. And I was like, interesting. I actually had came by the house and left my card in hopes that, she would call, or somebody would call me, whoever was living there, and left a little message on the card. And then
Mhm.
she was like, that was your card that I found. I said, yeah,
That's
that
so
was my
funny.
card.
Yeah.
And then I said, yeah, I used to live there. And, when I was about 4 or 5 years old, my family used to live there. And I just asked her, I was like, did anything unique happen? I didn't want to indulge her with too much information. I wanted her to
Sure.
indulge me because I wanted to see what her experience was. Did anything unique happen there? So she was like, are you by yourself? I said, yes. She was like, okay, let me get by myself. And I said, okay. I said, oh my God, this is the opportunity she's going to tell
It's
me.
coming. It's coming. Yeah.
I was like, she's going to tell me. So she was like, yes, I've had some interesting experiences from when I first moved in the house. She's actually been living there for about 6 years now. She's still in the house because she's having a hard time financially relocating.
Mhm.
So she told me that when she first moved in, they would hear growling noises, which is one of the things that we used to hear all the time. And they thought it was just animals, which it wasn't.
Mhm.
And then they started having nightmares, which is some of the things that we used to experience. And then she said she would see the dark shadows in the garage constantly. So she would close off access to the garage. Nobody was allowed to go into the garage, which is what happened when we were younger. And then she said that when the about a week and a half when she first moved into the house, she put everything away in the kitchen, and then she went into the room, and it sounded like a car ran into the house. So she walked back in there and realized that all the dishes and everything had been thrown all over the place. Same situation that happened when we lived there. She said that one of her kids, the covers on one of her kids' bed would constantly get pulled off of them in their room.
Mhm.
And she didn't believe it at first until she witnessed it. She was like, I witnessed the covers getting pulled off of my son. She said that
Yeah.
one day she was in her room. She took the day off from work. She was there by herself. The kids were at school. And she was laying in her bed, and all of a sudden she heard this laughing, and this little girl started walking across her bedroom and vanished out the wall. So I was like, wow. And then she just felt like it was almost like she couldn't wait to tell somebody what she had went
Sure.
through, because she's a Black woman. So and I know how hard it is to talk about that stuff being in her position. So she just couldn't wait to indulge me with everything. We sat on the phone for about 3 hours, and she was telling me all of the experiences that she had in the house, and I was just like, we went through the same thing. And we
Mhm.
left a year and a half later, and I asked her, I said, why are you staying? Why are you still there? And she said, she was married at one point. Her husband ended up committing suicide, which is a completely new story that I'm working on for her. He lived in the house with her, and her mother passed away, which she would come over and watch the kids a lot, but she died of cancer. So she said financially she was trapped because she would have went to her mother's house, but she's no longer there. And
Yeah.
then her other siblings are kind of just all over the place. So I felt so bad for her. I almost wanted to pay for her to move out of that house because I'm like, it's not going to get better.
Yeah.
They were like, it's
Well,
not
has
gonna
she
get
had
better.
she experienced anything like really crazy violent? I mean, or has it been more mild compared to your experience?
Yeah, she said that she had scratches on the back of her neck. She would hear this growling noise in her room. Her son got bruises all over the back of his back. He used to sleep on his stomach a lot, so when he got up, he
Whoa.
was complaining that he had a burning sensation on his back, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
she said that his back had bruises all over it. And he's kind of darker complected, so to see bruises on darker complected skin, it would have had to have
Yeah.
been real serious impact of
Wow.
some sort. But and he's the one that complained about having all of the severe dreams. So yeah, it was so refreshing. It was very devastating what she was going through by all means, but it was refreshing knowing that her experiences were we weren't making this up in our mind, that somebody else actually could
Yeah.
convey what we went through. So that was such a relief. Um, yeah, the experiences that we had, and I'm just like, I would pay for her to
Well,
leave. I really, uh-huh.
I
Yeah, I
was going to
really,
ask you. Oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
Go ahead, Alan.
No, I was going to ask you, when you're writing the book, was there anything that you kind of occurred to you in the process of writing the book that hadn't before?
Yeah, so I had to relive this entire moment, which was so
Yeah.
scary to have to retrace everything. And the thing that occurred to me was the dreams that we were having. The dreams that we were having were, we would tell my parents about, like, we just had this horrible dream. Um, my sister was sleepwalking in the dream, and I was sleepwalking in the dream, and it was almost like what they call deja vu situations that we were all having, and we were sharing it with each other. So as I started writing the book and recalling all of these situations that took place, I'm like, wow, maybe we were actually awake and sleepwalking together, because the dreams that we claimed that we had the night before were of us interacting with each other and having to face a demonic presence together. So when we woke up the next day, we were like, oh, did you have a crazy dream? Oh, you had a crazy dream. What was your dream about? And you were in my dream, and you were in my dream, and we were all together in the dream. But I said, maybe we weren't dreaming at all. Maybe we're
Yeah, yeah.
physically having a physical encounter with this entity together, and we were sleepwalking, or it possessed us.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I was like, would that be something where it was kind of controlling you?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be it. It has parallels to an alien abduction, where people will see each other and go, "Oh my gosh, I know you. I know you from that experience."
Yeah, yeah. That, and that's so crazy, because I'm doing this podcast with a ufologist by the name of Roderick Martin, and we're talking and having discussions on the connections between UFO, extraterrestrial, ufology studies, as well as paranormal encounters, and to see the distinctive relationships that actually exist between them. And there's a lot of similarities with a lot of people's encounters and their testimonies of what they experienced,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
from both spectrums. Having the bad dreams was a similarity. Feeling like they're walking, using radiation to detect the energies of an actual extraterrestrial, as well as a ghost or a entity. So there's so many
Mhm.
similarities there, with those connections. So
Is it possible that we are confusing or assuming something's a ghost, but maybe it's something else?
yeah, and that's what those discussions are, to to combine those concepts of thought. And I really
Mhm.
believe that a lot of those encounters could definitely well be some type of extraterrestrial encounter manipulating us in some form, or inserting themselves in some form, and presenting themselves to us, that we're misconstruing as what we're most familiar with, which is ghosts and their forms and their apparitional existence. So
Yeah.
I'm connecting with a lot of different individuals to get more data and to get more
Mhm.
information and background on that research, because I haven't really studied ufology, but I'm gaining a lot of insight and information from the ufology um, research panel. MUFON is one of the good organizations, which you may be familiar with that already,
Mhm.
and just following their investigative journey and their research. But I believe there is a connection, and I believe that we are possibly misconstruing what we're experiencing with what actually could be happening with
Wh-
extraterrestrials.
with your psychic intuition, when you've gone back to the house, do you pick up anything about its intent or its energy? Is it evil? Is it neutral? Is it lost?
Yeah. When I do research, whenever I pick up specific energies, I label them between an energy 1 or an energy 4. Energy 4 being the ones that are considered the demonic, the ones that actually have physical interaction with you. The ones being the lesser energy forms that are just visible or present, but doesn't actually have physical interaction with you. So when I went back to this house, the energy in the neighborhood was so strong to where I get headaches even driving down the road because of how intense this negative energy 4 is. So walking up to the house, I had my camera on and I was recording as I was walking up to the house because I wanted to document this first encounter back at this crazy house that causes all this emotional disruption. And my phone starts to static. And then my phone goes out and I cannot record anything. I couldn't start recording on my phone until I got halfway down the street. So, but when I walked back up to the house, it immediately, oh man, I saw an apparition float from the living room window. It was so strong. It was so. Can you still hear me?
I got you.
Sorry,
Yep.
I had a little bit of an interference. My God, somebody called. I'm set up on like do not disturb, but that doesn't. They don't.
It doesn't always work.
It doesn't work out. So it was such a strong energy, and I'm like, there's such a demonic, oh gosh, intense energy that is still in the area. It's
really interesting because your experience. I was just speaking to another paranormal investigator, a friend of mine today, and she had a thing where text starts showing up, like typing things out. And then on Skinwalker Ranch, if you've ever watched that show, they're depending on where they are. One person in particular, it seems to happen to, on his phone, it's like all of a sudden all the apps start opening up and start opening, closing, and it's glitching, and it's like, what is going on? This happens with people with their cell phones when they're in certain situations.
Yeah, when the energy form is much stronger, it can manipulate a lot of different things, especially because our devices, our cell phones and our cameras and our equipment, our K2 meters, all of those are composed of some type of energy or radiation. So they feed off of that radiation. So they have that ability to manipulate the mechanics of our equipment and our phones. So that's why any investigation that I've gone to, if there is a strong energy presence there, I have to bring backup batteries because
a lot.
It was so crazy. I did an investigation at a barbershop here in Kansas City, and I told everybody, and it was actually featured on the front cover of the Kansas City Star, and they came with me to kind of document my journey of investigation. And they were like, I just charged my phone. I told them, I said, don't be surprised if you guys lose battery because there's a very strong energy here. And if your devices and your camera equipment start to lose battery, it's because of that. So the camera started going out, and the two guys that were the photographers, their equipment started going out. They had to swap out their batteries. The journalist that was there, his microphone just completely went out. Like he had that little wireless microphone, it completely went out. His cell phone battery. So they were so spooked. And they were like, it's doing exactly what you said it was going to do. And I'm like, I kind of told you guys, this is what happened because this is what's here. So,
but there is more credence when you say this is what's going to happen, and then it happens.
Yes. And then it happens. And one of the cameras was actually still operating. So we even documented everybody talking about, oh my God, my equipment just went out. We documented that, which is really cool because I had said it ahead of time, and then it actually happened, and they're like the credibility. So, that they have the ability to manipulate equipment. And I just feel like they're getting even more sophisticated. The more we become advanced in our technology, the more they advance. That's why I'm like, there's got to be something additional or some additional connection, like extraterrestrial or UFO or something that is also intercepting as well.
Yeah, I mean, if they're able to, if these are spirits or whatever it might be, if they're able to manipulate like the electrical components or the electromagnetic energy, inherent in devices, eh, then that kind of makes sense to me that perhaps they can tap into your brain,
Yeah.
which is it's energy.
Yeah.
It's electrical impulses. And
Yes.
so that might explain how one could, especially if you're children and you're susceptible or more open,
Yeah.
more vulnerable. Yeah. And that maybe this thing is able to kind of like, I hate to say it, but like puppet master
Yeah.
you in a way, it's really creepy.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because they have such strong attachments to children and animals. And I've always still doing research on why they're so connected to them, or why children have the ability to sense them and to pick up on their existence more so than an adults. And my conclusion was that their brains are still so porous, and they're still absorbing so much, and they're, like you said, they have that puppet mentality to where they're learning what is true. They're still in the learning of what is true stages, so they're willing to observe things at a much more heightened ability than a conditioned, already programmed mind as an adult. I guess you can't create the mind of an adult as much as you can the mind of a child, an infant, a toddler, because they're still trying to understand the dynamics of living. So that's been a hypothesis of mine. I'm still doing a lot of parapsychological research to find out more closely based on other people's explanations of their version of truth to get a common ground of why. And then animals too, they have that, what I call an eighth sense. They can see them, and they have this other layer or other lens of sight to where they can see beyond what our actual observation of a ghost is. So my layer of sight is heightened. I call it my seventh sense. So my layer of sight is heightened more so than your layer of sight, because of what I have the ability to see on such a stronger level. And then animals' layers of sight are heightened to another degree. And, I would really love to see through the optics of a dog or a cat to see what they're seeing. Is it more of an infrared type of perspective of what they're seeing? Or like, how do they see it? Is it, what do they see? Is it more of a, kind of how like, what's that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's playing, what is it called? The Predator. I think it's The Predator.
Oh,
yeah. How they have that.
He's being hunted, right?
Yeah, he's being hunted, and then he can see the thermal. He has that thermal lens where he can see the wet, and he can see the actual, unless he's covered up in mud or something to block the thermal rays or whatever. I'm wondering if they have the ability to see from that thermal lens, and they can actually see it, or like what their view, what their optic is.
Right. Like, are they seeing in ultraviolet? Are they seeing like what can they perceive that we can't?
Yes. Because
have you found any ways that are effective in detecting them using like tech at all?
Using like just equipment. Yeah. So if are you saying it from a perspective, just like an everyday original person, if they wanted to see if they had ghosts in their house, or just from my investigative perspective?
Oh, it's from your investigative perspective.
Yeah. So like I tell everybody, the best piece of equipment that I take to every investigation is me. I have that additional layer of sense to where I can see, feel, observe these energies, these apparitions, and be able to detect what level of energy that they that are accommodating them. So I do take K2 meters. I do take, my favorite one is the radiation detector. So I always take a radiation detector.
Interesting.
And every investigation, there's an investigation that I did at the Sally House in Atchison, Kansas, earlier, was it the end of last year? And I took the radiation detector. Now I have to be careful with that because everything in a house, especially the older houses, have a lot of radiation. So you have to rule out so many different things, the light switches, other people's cell phones, you have to rule out the different things that would detect radiation. But
Okay.
I take it because it gives me, it's like my little compass. Besides myself, it's my compass of electromagnetic type of detection. So when I went to the Sally house, and I actually did this investigation with Sam and Kobe, who are pretty well-known YouTubers, and they go on journeys and doing investigations all over the world. So they contacted me to be in this investigation. So I go into the investigation. Don't tell me everything. Let me feel it. Let me get the vibrations, and I'll tell you what I feel. So
Hey, Marie, can you turn your camera just slightly to the right so you're a little more centered? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's all right.
So move over here. There we go. Now I'm centered. So I went to the Sally house, and I took my radiation detector, and automatically my vibrations went off. And there's this closet right when you first walk in this house. And apparently there's a lot of doll carriages and things like that are positioned in this closet. But I got such a strong vibration. So I opened the closet, and there's this little carriage in there. And I put my radiation detector inside of the carriage because I saw like a little apparition in there. And it immediately went off in the closet. So again, I have to rule out with these older houses, all of the piping and the electrical components that are in the wall and around the surface areas, because they can set that radiation detector off very easily. So once I was able to rule that out, I'm like, there's an entity in here. There's an entity in here. And then there was an entity upstairs in the closet. There was like a bunch of dolls lined up in this one room. And this one room gave me such eerie feeling. And I'm like, there's at least 3 or 4 entities in this room. Oh my God.
Why are dolls so creepy? Like what is that?
It's so funny because people are like, well, why do ghosts have a tendency to always implant themselves into dolls or objects or things like that?
Yeah.
And I'm still researching that, but they do have a tendency to tie themselves to an object, not necessarily implant themselves entirely inside or embed themselves inside the object, but they could be their energy form could be attached to it for some reason. But I'm still trying to find out why it would be. And maybe it's because the formation of that doll is similar to what their actual formation was in their original life, in their human form. And maybe it was something that they were so attached to in the human form that they attached themselves to it in the afterlife. So, but there's so many speculations on it and why some objects might be more haunted or have more activity or energy than others. So I took that radiation detector. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I took that radiation detector and they took me into this room, and they're like, this one is known to have activity. And I'm like, well, yeah, there's 3 ghosts literally standing around the bed area. So I told them about what I saw, and then I went into the closet. I was drawn to the closet, and then I see a childlike presence kind of run out of the closet. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I see the dolls on the ground. So I take the radiation detector because I'm like, at this point, I want to see which one of these dolls they're most attached to. So I take it to all of the dolls, and then it stops on this one doll. Kind of has like a Raggedy Ann look to her, which is so ironic. And then it just kept going off. So I put my radiation detector down, actually told one of the guys to hold it, and I told him to keep it upright. And then I looked at the doll to make sure that it didn't have like batteries in it, that it wasn't, like had any mechanical components in it. It was just a regular stuffed basic doll. But when I put that radiation detector on that doll, it went off constantly. It was the primary object in the house that continued to go off and had no wiring, electrical components in it at all. Completely.
Wow. Yeah.
It was.
Well, that's what you always want when you're investigating, right? You want to rule out any interference or explanation. Well, I mean, obviously, you want the truth.
You want the truth.
You want the truth. So whatever that is, but you kind of do want it to be a ghost, right?
Yeah. You want to have that. Okay. Yes, there is activity here. Yes, there is some type of energy form. Yes, we are able to detect it, and yes, we can show that it exists in our version of truth to the audience, so they can understand what we're seeing and experiencing, and what other people that might live in that property or on that land might be experiencing, so they can see the truth. because there's so many different veils of truth. You know, there's the veils of truth that people manipulate. There's so many manipulated situations. It's hard to know what is real and what isn't real, you know, to rule those things out. So people are like, okay, this is real because there's nothing in this doll. Why is my radiation detector going off? Get the camera in on this. Do you guys see this? You know what I mean? Those are those yes moments that all of us investigators have when we're doing our field investigation, because we want to have that.
Well, is it dangerous if the radiation detector is going off? I mean, should you be concerned about whatever exposure, whatever this energy is that's like simulating or is radiation?
Yes, as far as the actual radiation and how it affects you, yes. In that same investigation, it got so strong, that energy and that radiation level was so intense to where it starts to give me headaches. And this is how you know that the energy is so intense. I get headaches, I start sweating, and I get very, very dizzy. So it's too strong. So sometimes I have to walk out of investigations because I'm like, it's too overpowering. So those are the things that you have to be careful of when you're doing investigations, because some of the investigators have come out of these investigations not understanding why they have these additional layers of disorientation, because you're dealing with things that have heightened radiation and it can impact you physically. That just died. I mean, it can definitely impact you physically.
What about you? Have you ever just been affected physically or drained?
Oh, yes. I was so drained at that investigation. We were there for about an hour and a half. And then I had to leave because I was so hot. My body temperature was starting to get hot. I was so dizzy. I felt like I was going to pass out. And I'm me being so, my energy's being so vulnerable, I guess you can say, that it makes me an easy target for heightened radiation levels. So I'm very sensitive to things and energies than other people. So I have to be very careful with my investigations, but I ended up having to leave a little early. They were actually hoping that I could spend the night. And I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. Not in this house, because.
Wait, do you know what though? It's like anything else, Marie, that like you have to take care of yourself. So whether you're an athlete or a restaurant worker or, you know, office worker or whatever your thing is, you can't just keep going and going and going and going and going. And especially for you, since your sensitivity is so important, it doesn't make sense to just keep like kind of abusing yourself and draining yourself like that.
Yeah.
When you were doing the book, I'm assuming, did you interview your family?
Yes, I did.
You did. What was that process like?
It was interesting, you know, because the reason why I started coming out with everything is because my father passed away. So I felt like this is our opportunity to find out what's going on. We're no longer shushed. We're no longer restricted. So I went to my family and we all sat down and I was like, I just want to talk about what happened when we lived in that house. Yeah. Just to make sure that I'm not imagining it, because we hadn't talked about it in years. We didn't speak about it. So when we all came together and we collaborated on everything and everybody told their stories, everybody told what they saw, I was like, great. How do you guys feel about me sharing the story? How do you feel about me telling our truth? And would you be a part of it? Some of my siblings were very on board with it. And then some of them were just kind of like, I don't want to relive that moment. I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to journey down that road anymore. So I had to be respectful of that. But I said, okay.
But that was a confirmation in a sense,
that was
right?
a confirmation. It was a confirmation of what we experienced. So I asked them for their consent to tell the story. They all gave consent. And, you know, we all used our real names in the book. The only names that I did not use in the book were of two young ladies that were our friends that called the house the bad house. I wanted to protect their identities. So I swapped their names out for different names. But other than that, our real names in the book, my mother and father's real name, all of our stories are real and true. So getting their consent kind of gave me that gateway to investigate everything additionally, tell the story, share the story. And I kind of was the poster child. This is the trial and error for me. See how it works. Okay. See how people respond to you. See how they
Well,
take you.
well, now that your book is done, had positive responses like it has,
Yeah.
are those other family members like, oh, darn it, maybe I should have just shared my story?
They're very supportive. They're like, you're so
Okay.
bold to talk about
Mhm.
it. And I want to tell my version. And I say, you should, because I
Yeah.
wasn't always with you guys when you had your experiences. I'm telling it from my perspective of what I saw and what we went through. So if you can share your perspective,
Yeah.
hey, do
Hey,
that.
maybe write it under a pseudonym. But it's funny you said that they said that about you. Joan in chat says, "Oh wow, this is an amazing experience, Marie. You are so strong."
Thank you, Joan. Yeah, and it took a lot of strength to even have this conversation. To even have this
Mhm.
conversation, it took a lot. I went through a lot. I had a lot of people criticize me. Oh, you're making this up. No, we're not. I wish we were. I have scars to this day from my personal encounters. Then there was a lot of people that said, well, where's your faith at? You don't believe in God. And I was ridiculed because of my religious stance. I don't have a religious denomination association.
Mhm.
I'm not Catholic. I'm not Christian. I'm not Baptist. I'm not any of that stuff. I'm just human. And I'm
Yeah.
telling what I've experienced from my human perspective. So, I've had to go through a lot of ridicule, a lot of criticism. A lot of it came from Black people. A lot of it came from people that look like me. And I had
Is it is
to
it is it different when it's coming from a Black person versus a white person or anyone else?
different.
Mm.
It's very different. It's very touchy coming from a Black person. In the beginning, it was very,
Mhm.
very touchy. I couldn't just talk about it. I couldn't go to them and be like, hey, this was going on. It was very delicate of an introduction to people that look like me, to the Black people. And then for
Do you know why that is? Like that cultural difference?
yeah, and my position on it is we were trained with this lens and this idea of we are strong mentality.
Mhm.
It was embedded in us, and the things that we experience as a culture, we had this we are better than the things that try to oppose us mentality. So anything outside of strength and unity, it was kind of like dismissed, and we were so dismissive of it, and it would associate us with our counterparts, our white counterparts, or our other cultures.
Yeah.
So it was such a taboo thing, and I think it's because we were conditioned to believe that anything outside of us coming together and having a strength and a force field was
Mhm.
automatically against us. So we didn't
Interesting, yeah.
acknowledge it. Sometimes they say if you acknowledge it or you give it energy, then it's going to
Yeah.
exist, which to a certain degree is very, very true. So they didn't want to give energy or acknowledgement to those things, and were very, very dismissive of it. Even if they experienced it, it was a very dismissive culture of it.
Sure. So
Uh,
at the center of it sounds like unity is kind of an important aspect of that.
yeah,
Right.
it
I
is.
mean, like in Catholicism, because I was raised Catholic, and times have changed, of course, but to do something like tarot cards was like
Yeah, yeah.
considered, of the devil's work.
You're the devil worshiper. I'm gonna plug my charger.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yeah, you're anything like that.
Mhm.
With all of my research, I have to understand what I'm going up against. So I do a lot of researches on different cultures and their practices, their beliefs, their ritualistic ways, because I have to understand what might be contributing to the existence of these energy forms.
Mhm.
So some people come over my house and they see I got all kinds of books, and I got a demonology book. I have, the Teaching of All Ages, which talks about multiple different cultures and their practices. I have so many different books and educational materials because I got to understand it in order to know how to fight it, or to know
Mhm.
how to interact with it, or to just exist in its presence. So I got a lot of criticism because of the books, and people label me, "Are you a witch?" No, I'm not a witch. I don't
Uh,
practice
yeah.
witchery. I study the dynamics of
Mhm.
that culture and the people who actually practice, witch rituals and all that, and black magic or whatever. I study it to understand it, so that way
Mhm.
I can understand the differences and differentiate what this particular practice is from this culture or this subculture. I have to learn about it. But a lot of people automatically label me like, okay, she's a witch or she's into voodoo. And I'm like, no, let's get rid of all that. I want to rid people's minds. I want to just do a cleanse of everything that people think is contributing to what's going on or culturally. I want to rid that. No, white people, Hispanic people, Asians, they're not the only people that have ghost encounters. We do too. We go through it, but we don't talk about it. So I'm going to be the poster child for, yes, it happens. And even if I have to experience ridicule, criticism, judgment, go right ahead. I'm still going to have the same position on how I feel, and my experiences will always be the same. Not going to change. It's going to be an
you actually wrote a book about it, so now it's out.
And it has been
yeah, there's no walking it back at this point.
I'm not going to be able to undo that. It's not.
Right. For those who are thinking about the book, what do you hope that people take away from the book?
I want them to see that you don't have to be in a certain setting. It doesn't have to be a certain type of race. That these experiences exist, and to change your mindset on how we look at life, or to at least heighten your mindset on the fact that there are other things taking place in this world that we can't always give a scientific explanation to. I want them to understand that, every culture has their own experience. Every individual has their own experience. And just because you look a certain way doesn't mean that you haven't experienced something that someone else has. So I want them to take that out of the book and to be able to say, okay, other people do have these dynamics of experiences in their life. And I shouldn't be so critical and judgmental of it. Take that out of the book, take that story, and understand that there's more to this world than what we know. Unlearn everything. I want people to unlearn.
I think, that's one truth that has always been true, that there's more to this world than we know or think we know. Marie, thank you so much. What a perfect way to end it. So everyone, go to Ghostlink TV on Facebook, follow Marie, and look for her book. Eventually, it will be on Amazon. But in the meantime, you can email Marie to get the book if you want. And that is ghostlinktv@gmail.com.
At gmail.com.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Marie. It's so good to see you again.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Alan. Thank you so much.
And in high definition, too.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Marie. Thank you for chat. If you are a fan of Paranormal Now and Coffee and UFOs and this channel in general, please like, comment, but most importantly, to support this show, subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss upcoming shows. I would really appreciate any support that you can give, and please share this episode as well. Thank you, everyone in chat. Good night, and until next time, live in the mystery.